Is the dark night of the soul a spiritual experience? This is a tricky question. And if you don't know what the dark night of the soul is, well, let's back up for a moment and explain. What we find in spiritual literature around the world, as well as more contemporary psychological literature, is the recognition that there are times in our lives when we seem to go through deep, deep periods of despair that are not the same as a clinical depression or a grieving time of sadness or loss, but something more like an existential crisis. One of the hallmarks of a dark night of the soul is the sense of having lost connection to frameworks of meaning, having lost a sense of hope, feeling even abandoned by the spiritual world specifically. Not just the people in our lives, but it's more about our relationship to meaning and higher power and those sorts of things. And ultimately, the phrase dark night of the soul was coined by a Christian theologian and mystic named St. John of the Cross. In fact, he wrote this incredible, I don't know what you would call it. It's more than a passage. It's certainly not an article, but this beautiful, beautiful treatment of what is the dark night of the soul, its stages, and what it feels like. What St. John of the Cross was pointing to, that so many spiritual teachers and authors have followed in kind with over the years, is the understanding that very often before we move levels on the spiritual path, we sort of need to dissolve, disintegrate, give up, or release previous states and stages of our spiritual path, or our identity, or our worldview. And in the moments where we feel some fundamental aspects of our reality, like worldview, or concept of God, or concept of self, completely dissolving and breaking down, that feels like a dark night of the soul. Of course, what we also see in the literature is that it's a necessary stage. It's an important stage. It's a cultivating stage, a grooming stage, and it allows us to move to the next step in whatever our process of growth is. So, the dark night of the soul is a kind of spiritual experience because it's filled with profound spiritual questions. It is, in some ways, the absence of spiritual connection. However, I would not call it a spiritual experience. I would call it a spiritual stage. It is a stage that we go through on a journey, and in that stage, which could last a night, a day, a year, we may have a variety of types of spiritual experiences within that. Experiences of energy, experiences of spirit, experiences of synchronicity. But typically, the dark night of the soul is best thought of as a part of a process, a part of a journey. It's not a destination. It's just a passage that we must go through in order to be ready for what waits on the other side.